Well, hello to everyone that's joined us online. I am Dominique Pichard. I'm the Chief Scientific and Medical Officer at IRSF, the International Rett Syndrome Foundation. I'm a physician scientist specializing in rare disease research and rare disease clinical trials, and formerly was a director of the Division of Rare Diseases Research Innovation at NCATS NIH, where I had the opportunity to work across the NIH to bring rare disease funding programs to close gaps. But more importantly, I am mom to Catalina, a 19-year-old young lady who lives with Rett syndrome. I get it, and I'm here because this is personal. Joining me today are Carmen Luna, our clinical network director, and mom to Blake, a 10-year-old girl living with Rett syndrome, and Bala Rao, IRSF's Director of Translational Research. And he's an RNA biologist who brings deep expertise from both academic and industry settings. So our mission at IRSF is dual. We support and empower families today while driving advancements to accelerate getting treatments into the hands of those living with Rett syndrome tomorrow. These two parts of our mission don't just coexist. They truly fuel each other. When my daughter was diagnosed in 2008, many kids with Rett syndrome were not in an enriched environment. There were no eye gaze devices for individuals. Inclusion at schools was the exception, not the norm. And diagnosis depended on meeting clinical criteria first before genetic testing would even be done. And at that time, it took months to get back your genetic results. And often they were not able to find a mutation, excuse me, that today are more easily able to be identified. Males were almost never tested because Rett, it was thought, was not compatible with life. And of course, there were no FDA-approved treatments at the time for Rett syndrome. And in fact, there were no pharmaceutical companies that were even sponsoring clinical trials. But today, kids are getting diagnosed earlier and earlier. An enriched environment is encouraged. There's material about Rett syndrome that is easily accessible online and in print to educate people about Rett syndrome. We have 21 centers of excellence. We have our first comprehensive publication about male MECP2 spectrum to correct prior misconceptions about Rett syndrome. There's an FDA-approved drug, 2 companies that are running pivotal gene therapy trials, and there's a robust pipeline of potential treatment to be tested in clinical trials. The landscape has changed dramatically because of this community. Those of us with a loved one with Rett have lived off hope that one day, we may hear our sons and daughters say, "I love you, Mom." One day, Rett may release the grip it has on our sons and daughters. Hope that one day life will be less challenging for our sons and daughters. And while hope might get us through the long days and nights, hope is not an executable strategy. At IRSF, we turn hope into action, and that is what we are here to talk about today. So let's start off by looking at the Rett syndrome pipeline and why it's important to have multiple approaches, why this matters so much in Rett. Well, Rett is complex. MECP2 is a gene in every cell of the body, and it's a master regulator, turning on and off other genes. So it's not a simple problem to fix, and it's going to take multiple treatment strategies to get the best outcomes for our loved ones with Rett syndrome. And let's put this into perspective. So let's talk about a problem like high blood pressure. This is a seemingly simple problem to fix. It doesn't involve the brain. It doesn't involve child development. It's just elevated blood pressure. And yet there are over 70 FDA-approved drugs for blood pressure across 10 different classes of drugs. And if you ask multiple people what medications they take for their blood pressure, you're going to get multiple different answers of either single drugs or different combinations of drugs, because that's how pharmacy works. These pharmaceuticals work. They don't all work the same for multiple different individuals, even for a problem that might seem as simple as high blood pressure. So now to talk about something a little more familiar, seizures. There's no one best treatment for seizures. Many of you have been through the exhausting process of trying drug after drug, different combinations, different side effect profiles. because what works for one child doesn't work for the next. There are approximately 30 FDA-approved drugs for seizures because no one drug works for all. And that's not a failure of medicine. It's really the reality of complex conditions and of treatment approaches. And that reality is true for genetic treatments as well. So we can talk about spinal muscular atrophy, which is a genetic neurologic condition that has a gene therapy that was approved in 2019. So it's a good example of a complex genetic disease that has actually multiple different treatments that are approved, including the gene therapy and other genetic approaches. So in SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, the majority of babies that are born with type 1 SMA, these are children that would typically die within the first 2 years of life. Because of gene therapy, they are now living and they're hitting developmental milestones. And that is incredible and a transformative treatment. But that gene therapy did not cure SMA. And those living with SMA type 1 still have SMA and SMA-related medical conditions. They still see an SMA specialist, and they still require other medications to treat those remaining medical conditions. So I just want us to really recognize this is where we're headed with Rett. Our goal is to have a medicine cabinet full of both genetic and non-genetic medicines that will be prescribed for individuals with Rett and that can work together to give your loved one the best treatment options available. These are not mutually exclusive treatments. And science takes time, always more time than we would like. So we really need to keep filling the pipeline to fuel tomorrow's treatment options. As you're going to hear today, IRSF takes this task seriously. We want to fund the early stage work that is needed to build the pipeline of treatment options, both genetic and non-genetic. Fund work that is needed to ensure that we have successful clinical trials. And most importantly, we connect with you, our community, to ensure we understand the daily needs of our families, the changing needs of our families, and work to build programs that address those needs. Now I want to bring Carmen into the discussion to talk about our care focus within our science division. Hi, Carmen.
Hi, Dominique.
So Carmen, can you tell us about our Center of Excellence Network?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am so happy and excited to be here with you today to talk about the Center of Excellence Network because they are such an important part of our larger Rett community. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I call the Center of Excellence Network COE. So you will hear me say that throughout this presentation. That's what I mean, Center of Excellence. Now, I am really proud of the relationship IRSF has built with these COEs and the COE directors who lead the clinics, as well as clinic coordinators, research staff, and multidisciplinary clinicians. I know there are a lot of questions around the COE network, so first I want to talk about what it takes to be a Center of Excellence. So a clinic has to meet a list of criteria that was developed by the IRSF Medical Advisory Board to be considered for COE designation. So a few of those criteria include a physician director who oversees all clinical services and has expertise in the diagnosis and medical management of Rett syndrome. A clinic has to agree to participate in the IRSF-funded Rett syndrome registry, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They have to provide an array of services, either directly or through referrals, as well as others. So some common questions I get all the time are, how do I get a Center of Excellence where I live? We know not everyone lives close to a Center of Excellence, and some people really wish that they had a Center of Excellence where they live. So do we. But that can't always happen. And the main reason for that is there has to be a physician who is interested in leading a Center of Excellence. So there has to be a physician there that has expertise in Rett syndrome. They have to have the interest in building up a clinic, and they have to be willing to do the work to put a structure in place. So a lot of times we have families who are wonderful families, very involved in the community, and they want these things to happen, but perhaps the physician that they see, isn't there yet. So that is a big factor when deciding or when trying to get a COE in a community where a patient might live. Another common question I get is, why does COE-X in Ohio, let's say, look so much different than COE-Y in California? And so it's a good question, but each clinic is unique. Each hospital system has different policies in place at their institution. We don't have the authority to standardize exactly how every clinic looks. We have the criteria, including the few items that I mentioned previously, that we require COEs to meet, but we can't require standardization for every single thing. Another thing to consider is that some clinics have regional Rett associations that fundraise for them. So they're able to buy specialist time. So perhaps the specialist can see everyone in one day. So the patient is in one room and specialists cycle through, over a 4 to 6 hour time period. But some clinics have, some clinics don't have regional associations that fundraise for them. So they might not have that. Some clinics you may see some specialists, but then you may get referrals to see other specialists on a different day. Both of those are good setups, they're just different. So depending on where you are in your journey, you may not want to attend a 6-hour clinic visit. But maybe if you're traveling 8 hours to get to clinic, you would like to have, the 6-hour clinic, see all the specialists and get it one and done. But if you live closer, you might have access to visit the clinic more often. So there are a lot of variations to what a clinic can look like. And then the last question I get really frequently is, why should I attend clinic? A lot of people have local doctors that they see, or they have a neurologist that, is really helpful to them, that is not at a center of excellence. And so they wonder, why do I even need to go to a center of excellence clinic? And so what I usually answer for that is going to a COE gives you access to experts that know Rett syndrome. And those experts have access to the larger COE network of experts. And that's the beautiful thing about the COE network. Your doctors have easy access to each other if they need help to brainstorm hard cases, and they already have established relationships with each other. Another good reason is when you visit a COE, you get access to the most up-to-date information on clinical trials. COE directors are in the know and work closely with industry partners, and many of them participate as sites for clinical trials. And then lastly, a very important point, access to a center of excellence is in a way a form of insurance. Your child may be perfectly healthy now, but there's a good chance at some point you will have an issue and will end up needing clinical guidance, or in the hospital needing help from someone who understands Rett syndrome. If you're established at a COE, you will have access to your Rett doctor to help you and the local clinicians and or hospital you are working with as they navigate your situation. Establishing care with a center of excellence and going for a clinic visit every 1, 2, or even 3 years keeps you in their system and makes it easier for the center of excellence director to help you when you need it most. Last thing I want to mention about the COE network is that we do hold clinics accountable and to a high standard of care. They don't just gain COE status and keep it forever. We have regular weekly communications with them, annual progress reporting, and limited designation periods. Meaning, for example, the current designation period for a Center of Excellence is 3 years. Started in 2024 and will end in 2027, prior to which existing Centers of Excellence will be able to apply to renew their COE designation, and clinics interested in becoming a new COE will be able to apply for COE designation.
Thanks so much, Carmen. And I just want to reiterate that point you said about being an established patient at a COE is like your insurance policy, where when things change for your loved one with Rett and you need that Rett expertise, if you're already established, it's much easier to get a follow-up appointment as opposed to being a new patient at a clinic, which can take months depending on what that clinic's wait time is for new patients. So that's a great point. And really, the COE network is a gift. We're so grateful to all of the clinicians and the additional staff that work at these COEs to provide excellent care. So can you tell me a little bit about, we talked a lot about what the benefits of the COEs, but what do the COEs do to help Rett syndrome?
Sure. So the most obvious and critical COEs that I mentioned a little bit above is to provide excellence in care to our loved ones with Rett. So that is the COE physician director, who's not always, but usually a neurologist, specialists and therapists and research and clinic coordinators. They are a whole team that is focused on Rett syndrome and providing the best-in-class care. So that is their number one role. But I'm going to mention a couple other because the COEs really do. It's not just caring clinics. So one of the other things is that IRSF funds clinical research projects in addition to the foundational and translational research projects that Paul is going to talk about in a little bit. So these projects are led by Centers of Excellence, and I want to highlight two of them. So the first one I want to highlight is the male Rett spectrum study, which I'm hoping that most of you have heard of at this point. We have a males page on our website where you can find information about this study. It's been posted on our socials, and it was in the Rett Gazette. So this study was led by the Children's Hospital of Colorado, co-PIs, Dr. Tim Binky, who is a COE director, and Dr. Talia Thompson. This was done in collaboration with two other centers of excellence, Vanderbilt University Medical Center and University of Alabama, Birmingham. And then the third collaborator, and most important, were the parents and caregivers, males with Rett, who put their blood, sweat, and tears into making this project happen. So we are so grateful for the work that they've done. So this was the first study of its kind, and the aim was to help us better understand the male diagnostic odyssey, from delayed diagnosis for many to differences in development and symptoms to caregiver burden compounded by a sense of invisibility. This resulted in the most comprehensive and up-to-date publication on male Rett spectrum, allowing IRSF and the Rett community to advocate for the inclusion of males in research, clinical trials, and community resources. I want to highlight another study, the PRISM study, and I'm going to hand it over to Dominique to talk about.
Thanks, Carmen. And I'm just going to jump in and let our audience know you can use the Q&A to enter any questions that you have as we're talking. All right. So the PRISM study, Carmen, this is an exciting study and a topic that I'm definitely passionate about, and a topic that I worked on while I was at NIH recently. So currently in the US, and actually globally, there are multiple ways that a baby may get genomic sequencing. They might be part of a pilot research study where they are asked for consent to have their baby's blood taken for whole genome sequencing, and then given results of certain genes. There are also other ways where, a baby may end up, say, in the NICU for an unrelated issue, not related to Rett syndrome, of course, and get whole genome sequencing to see what is causing it, and incidentally find out that they have a MECP2 mutation that looks like it should be disease causing. So these are different ways that babies might get genetic sequencing. And since these are infants, they are largely going to be asymptomatic and not showing signs of Rett syndrome. So we can't yet know if they're actually going to develop Rett syndrome or not. And we know that there's individuals with Rett syndrome, with MECP2 mutations and actually do not go on to develop Rett syndrome. They're published in the literature. Our Center of Excellence network follows several of these families. And so we have to be really careful about what that early genetic diagnosis, that early genetic finding means. And particularly when we talk about treatment options later on, if there are going to be particularly genetic approaches that are one time and irreversible, we want to know who should we be giving these treatments to. So this is a study that is coming out of UNC, one of our centers of excellence. And the geneticist who's involved in one of these pilot research studies works both in the Rett clinic as well as on this study. And it is really looking to see, are there early electrophysiological markers that can help identify who will go on to develop Rett syndrome and who will not when all of these individuals do have a MECP2 mutation, but they're still too young to know. So it's a really, exciting study that'll help us kind of identify individuals earlier if they've happened to have genetic sequencing done.
Dominique. Another stream of work I want to mention really quick is that IRSF has a clinical trial committee. And so all companies running clinical trials in the US present their clinical protocols to our clinical trial committee to get key opinion leaders and caregiver input early on. So the key opinion leaders are Center of Excellence directors, and the caregivers are families like you might sit on this committee to help give their opinion on things. This is to guide industry on best practices in Rett and to provide input on the feasibility from a caregiver perspective. So we're really proud of our clinical trial committee who has given feedback to many of the industry partners hosting clinical trials right now. The last thing I want to mention is our Rett syndrome registry, which is a big part of the work that we do here. So I'm going to hand it off to Dominique again to talk about that.
Thanks, Carmen. And I'm going to, there was a question that came in about most of the COEs are at children's hospitals, and are there any age cutoffs being a part of the COE, or can adults with Rett also participate? And yes, the majority of our centers of excellence can see adults with Rett syndrome in their Rett clinic. One of the challenges is that some of the specialists that are associated with the multidisciplinary Rett clinic may not, as pediatric subspecialists, may not be able to see the adult for, let's say like a pulmonary issue, a lung issue, or a kidney issue. But the Rett centers have specialists in with affiliated adult hospitals that can certainly see a specialist. So I do encourage even those adults living with Rett syndrome to call your closest COE and talk about making an appointment. All right, so back to you were priming me to talk about the Rett syndrome registry and the natural history study. So this is really, a great topic where the NIH funded a natural history study for 15 years, and that ended in 2021. So this work was really life-changing for Rett syndrome. This is where our scientific community learned a great deal about Rett syndrome, published more than 60 peer-reviewed papers in the scientific and medical literature. And so the medical community has access to this well-designed research that really defines the medical syndrome of Rett syndrome. So having spent my early career in conducting clinical trials in rare diseases, I really had a good sense that the natural history was really a critical part of drug development. And I knew from kind of what the FDA would tell us about, particularly for rare diseases, how we really need to, sorry, I'm going to advance my slides. Thank you. We really need to make sure that we understand the natural history study well. And so we're fortunate to have that natural history study. But when it ended in 2021, we wanted to make sure that we would continue to study the natural history of Rett syndrome, because the disease is changing as we understand more, we have a more enriched environment, and there'll be treatments that are coming down the pike. So for that reason, IRSF launched the Rett Syndrome Registry, which is modeled off of the natural history study, but kind of modernized for Rett syndrome in 2021. And we also added a specific questionnaire that was relevant to males with Rett syndrome because we heard from parents it's really important. There's some aspects of the male spectrum that really weren't captured in that natural history study. And so we needed to have that data. So we included that. The one thing is that you do need to be seen at a center of excellence clinic in order to participate in the registry because that clinician data is a really important part of it. And that was really an important part of the value of the natural history study is having both the clinician enter data as well as the caregiver enter data. And this is at specific time points and kind of consistent data that's collected over time. And you may have heard that both Taysha and Neurogene developed novel endpoints for their pivotal studies based on developmental milestones. And it was through their analysis of this clinical data that they were able to create this new endpoint that had never been used in a clinical trial before. And we're really so grateful to the families, to the clinicians, and to all the clinical support staff that made that natural history study possible and continue to make the Rett Syndrome Registry possible because without it, we wouldn't be advancing therapeutics the same way. So Carmen, can you tell me a little bit about resources for families?
So, I'm going to talk really briefly about resources IRSF provides families through the Center of Excellence Network, but these resources are all also available on our website. So just a couple, we have a newly diagnosed folder that we hand out to families when they come to clinic for the first time after being diagnosed. So this connects connects families to IRSF, giving them access to other supports and resources. So this is a really important first touch point. We have the comprehensive care guidelines and quick reference guide. These are the care guidelines that Center of Excellence directors help to develop. And these are really important for families to have themselves so they can track that their child is receiving the care that they need in the timeline that they should be. But it's also a really great resource for families to be able to share with their local clinician, to hold that local clinician accountable for the care of their patients. So these are also available in Spanish, and you can find both on our website. Something exciting that I want to mention is that this year we are developing comprehensive care guidelines for adults. We heard in our community listening sessions that this is really needed. We need to have care guidelines not only specific to Rett syndrome, but also specific to the health issues that adults have Rett syndrome, which is different. So we're really excited about that project coming later this year. We also have transition of care guidelines, which is targeted to our older children with Rett syndrome. And we have My Rett Ally, which is a resource that is really helpful, especially if you're earlier in your Rett syndrome journey, where you can get online and put every single bit of information about your child in, from their care specialists to the symptoms that they have. You can track seizures, you can upload IEPs and all of those types of things, and then you can share it for 24 hours or indefinitely with babysitters or doctors. So it's a really great tool to have in your tool belt. And then lastly, I want to mention Rett Forward, which is a clinical trial masterclass, which makes clinical trials easier to understand. As we have all these clinical trials with the genetic therapies and others coming down the pike, we really thought this was an important resource to offer our community. So this includes 3 modules with multiple sessions in each module that are self-paced, and they are presented by experts in Rett syndrome. This bridges the gap between complex science and everyday decision making. And we want our clinics to be clinical trial ready, but we also want our families and community to feel empowered and prepared for conversations around research and care. So we want our families to be clinical trial ready as well. And I will end with that. And I will just say my email is on the IRSF website. If you have questions about a Center of Excellence, feel free to contact me.
Thanks so much, Carmen, for this deep dive into the Center of Excellence network. And I will say, if people have questions about a specific Center of Excellence, it's best to call that Center of Excellence, as they're the ones that can answer questions on insurance and appointment times and that sort of information. So now I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to bring Bala on the screen so that we can talk about non-clinical work that we support and how we think about priorities. So let's
Hello,
see.
everybody.
Bala, thanks so much for joining. So can you just talk to us a little bit about what people mean when they say research pipeline?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dominique. I'll be delighted to tell all of our members and families more about how IRSF is dedicated to the discovery of transformative therapies and how that's further broken down. So the research pipeline, as is shown on this slide, is a series of investigational steps that help take foundational discoveries that we find in the lab and convert them into therapies, hence also referred to as from bench to bedside. So this pipeline is broadly comprised of 3 steps. The first being the foundational, which involves investigations that help understand the disease at a very molecular and fundamental level. It is what really helps us identify new genes, new molecular pathways, and new targets that can be further tested in the next rounds of research. The translational research, simply put, are investigations that actually determine the therapeutic value of these targets. It really is centered around building the infrastructure that can then take these targets and determine whether they can be drugged to bring about a therapeutic benefit. It also involves doing safety and efficacy studies with the chemical matter or any other modality that we have identified in vitro model systems as well as animal model systems. And last but not the least is the clinical bucket, which probably are more familiar with, and that involves actually testing some of these drugs in animals and humans before they're deemed safe to be used broadly in all different therapeutics. Now, as I've shown over here, while we call it a pipeline, it looks more like a funnel. And that's because as we move along from the foundational bucket all the way to a therapy, there's a great deal of attrition that happens. Not all foundational discoveries can be translated, and not all translational investigations are safe to be brought into the therapeutic space. And as a result, scientists have to always continuously be innovating to feed this pipeline at the foundational level so that we can keep having more shots on goal with more therapeutics.
Thanks. And can you talk a little bit about what role IRSF plays?
Jill, can you go back to the last slide, please?
Yeah.
Right. So there are 2 big aspects in which IRSF plays a critical role to enable more therapies. So for the actual therapeutic part, one of the things that IRSF does is we are continuously evaluating the research and the therapeutic landscape in the Rett syndrome space to try and identify the important unmet needs and identify gaps that need to be filled with information, with knowledge, and then fund those discoveries and provide resources that can help convert them into successful therapeutics. But in addition to that, another important part of IRS's contribution is its commitment to its scientific community. And that is in the form of critical research funding and support in these uncertain funding climate. As some of you might be aware, we are currently living a massive decrease in funding to academic labs which is sort of the backbone of our pharmaceutical industry. A lot of the key fundamental discoveries that get licensed to these industry are actually made in these labs, and most industries don't really do these kind of fundamental research. And so we feel that it is really important to ensure that these labs are supported through these times, that the projects do not get dropped, and the science has a way of continuing irrespective of the funding climate to make sure that they reach the correct fruition. The second part of our efforts is to build an inclusive, supportive, and connected community. By that, we mean we take a very global view on all different forms of therapeutics that can enable transform lives of Rett patients. That involves people bringing in different modalities and different approaches towards therapeutics, as well as making sure that the scientists are connected and there can be a free and quick exchange of knowledge and information between labs. And last but not the least, the only way to a successful Rett scientific community is to make sure that we have new people entering the field and they feel supported in being able to independently start robust Rett related research programs in their labs, because that's how we'll get influx of new ideas.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to advance the slide now. So can you talk a little bit about IRSF's priorities and how we've invested, over the last decade or so?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, IRSF is really committed to a multiple shots on goal kind of an approach towards Rett therapeutics. And the pie chart on your right over here is sort of a breakdown of really how we have a diversified research funding strategy that shows that our money is where our mouth is. So what you can see over here is a breakdown of our total research expense over the last about 15 years. And in the pink are areas that really are part of the foundational bucket. The blue are a part of our translational bucket, which includes gene therapy, which are the patterned slices, as well as other modalities that we are sort of investing in. And last but not the least, the clinical research that involves behavioral variables as well as different form of therapeutics. So some of the highlights of the IRSF funded research in all of these areas are critical because they really help us understand MECP2 function. So for instance, in the foundational bucket, it helps us ask, well, which cells should our therapeutics target, what target should complement MECP2 function in cells, and when should Rett patients receive therapies. In the translation, it helps us ask critical questions about how can we generate better reagent and better techniques that can make gene therapy more effective. Similarly, what are the new small molecule biologicals or biologics that we can develop, which can target other pathways and MECP2 for sort of a patient-centric therapeutic approach, as well as generate new innovative in vitro models that mimic the human brain as close as possible. And last but not the least, in clinical research, it really helps us identify better tools for measuring success of experimental drugs in a way that can translate from mice to humans. More importantly, also identify what are the critical course of disease in males, because that's an untapped, untouched area of therapeutics, and it's a big unmet need in this field. And last but not the least, it also gives us the opportunity to be able to fund clinical trials and understand how we can, what we need for the industry to sort of include more males in the trial. One example of one of the therapies we funded in the clinical trials was trofinetide.
Thanks, Bala. And funding work is, of course, a critical part of what we do. And another vital part you touched on it on the last slide is convening. So can you tell us a little bit about the science meeting?
Yeah, and this is something that I'm super excited about, obviously. And this is the IRSF annual science meeting. So every year, IRSF brings together the scientists in the Rett community all in one place at the annual science meeting, where we provide a platform for all the scientists to be able to freely exchange their ideas, their data, and their latest progress. And this, as we have heard from our scientists as well, is an extremely valuable opportunity for our scientists to be able to take each other's work, collaborate, and synergize their efforts and bring about some really fundamental discoveries that help the pipeline that I was able to show you earlier.
Sorry about that. My mute was running away from me. So Bala, thank you so much for sharing IRSF's research funding strategy. So in the remaining time that we have, I want to talk about treatments that are being developed in Rett syndrome. And this is a pipeline graphic that I showed earlier. As you all know, we have one FDA-approved treatment called DAYBUE. And there are two gene therapies that are currently being studied in a phase 3 clinical trial. Excitingly, launching very soon is a global clinical trial that is brought by UCB, which will also be a phase 3 study. And before I talk about the gene therapies, which I'm going to do next, I do want to touch on this UCB clinical trial and a couple other clinical trials. So UCB has an approved treatment called Fintepla, or fenfluramine, that is indicated for Dravet syndrome. And they recently also studied this in CDKL5 deficiency disorder and received positive results. So UCB is now wants to test Fintepla in Rett syndrome. And this clinical trial will be a global clinical study, including many different countries. And one of the exciting aspects of this trial is that through their work with the IRSF Clinical Trial Committee, and thanks to the families with males who contributed to that male study that Carmen mentioned earlier, and then the timely publication of that study, this UCB clinical trial will enroll both males and females with Rett syndrome. So this is a first for Rett syndrome, and I'm really excited about that. And UCB will be sharing more details about their study, so stay tuned. So the next few items on the graphic represent companies that are running early phase clinical trials in countries outside of the US. So Minarex has a phase 2 study in Spain with lariglitazone, which is a PPAR gamma agonist. Neurotech International has a phase 2 study in Australia with NTI-164, which is a cannabinoid drug. And Unravel is testing a modified form of vorinostat in a phase 1/2 study in Colombia. So I know through the questions that came in advance, there's so many questions about gene therapy. So I'm going to first provide a brief update on the two clinical trials, the two companies that have clinical trials ongoing. And this is material that is publicly available. Taysha and Neurogene provided to me from their website. So this is material that is provided by Taysha and then by Neurogene. So in Taysha's phase 1/2 study, they enrolled 4 participants in their low dose. And then you see on the right, they enrolled 6 participants in their high dose study. This is a gene replacement therapy that is delivered via lumbar puncture, and it's called an intrathecal delivery. So in the tiny font at the bottom, you'll see that this data is current as of May 2025. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear. This is data from May of 2025 that Taysha released. So Taysha reported that by May of 2025, 100% of their participants had gained or regained at least one developmental milestone, something that is not predicted without gene therapy based on the analysis of the natural history study. This next slide shows the developmental milestones that were achieved across all 10 participants that they are reporting as of May 2025. So this is not what any one individual, this is a pooled, data from a pooled analysis of all the participants. And this next slide shows additional skills that were captured outside of their developmental milestone assessment using other measurements in their phase 1/2 clinical trial. And going back to what we said earlier, that not everyone responds the same to any given treatment, and that's true for gene therapy as well. So you wouldn't expect everyone to make the same exact gains. They're starting at different points, different presentations, different developmental stages, different ages. But across the 10 participants, these are the pooled changes that have been seen. And then this final slide is about their current phase 3, or what's called a pivotal trial for Taysha 102. So they selected the higher of the 2 doses that they had tested in the phase 1/2 based on the results. And they're enrolling 15 participants and plan to be done their enrollment by the end of June. So next, I'm going to go through similar discussion about Neurogene. So first, we're going to talk about their phase 1/2 study. And these slides, again, are from Neurogene's publicly available slide deck. And they have shared data from the first 8 participants that were treated with the low dose, all of whom were pediatric patients. And again, in the bottom, in the small font, you can see this is data that was through October 30th of 2025. So that was their data cutoff point. So this slide demonstrates that 100%, this slide demonstrates that 100% of their pediatric patients in their cohort achieved functional gains across different domains. So fine motor, gross motor, communication. And that these results were durable out to 24 months. What this next slide shows is it's, again, a pooled data presentation of all the participants, and it shows gains or regains that were made from the 3-month time point on the left to greater than 12 months over on the right. So again, this is not one participant, but a pooling of all the participants. So finally, Neurogene is in their phase 3 pivotal clinical trial, currently enrolling participants. They are also anticipating to complete their enrollment by the end of June, and they will be enrolling 20 participants in their study. So more to come from Taysha and Neurogene as they complete the enrollment in their phase 3 studies and as they release data when it's appropriate. So this next slide is really to give an overview of of the different genetic approaches, genetic medicine approaches. And so in this discussion, we can talk the most about what we just talked about, the gene replacement therapy, which is the column on the left, because those are in clinical trials. So they're obviously fully developed into a clinical program, and there is some preliminary data from their phase 1/2 study. Everything else that we're talking about is really in development. And so there's a lot that could change, some modalities that may or may not work. So, we're going to kind of breeze through these a little bit faster because we don't have any human data to talk about. Okay. And one of the biggest challenges in genetic medicine is how do we get that genetic medicine to the cells in the brain, which is a really important area to treat for Rett syndrome. So there's different ways to deliver, and you'll see in the chart in terms of delivery, the one that's used for the gene replacement therapies that we just talked about is AAV9, which is the viral delivery. And the viral delivery is something that right now you can only get once. So you can get any genetic treatment that uses AAV only once in your lifetime because your body develops an immune reaction to the AAV. So if you were to get it again, you'd have an immune response. So as of today in 2026, we don't have a way to overcome that. But there's certainly, science that's building to come up with ways to overcome that. But if there's non-viral delivery of a modality or another way to get a genetic medicine in that is not using a virus, then those genetic medicines could theoretically be stacked. So you could get more than one. Okay. So the next modality that's the closest to reaching the clinic is RNA editing. And this modality is not for all mutations. So it's for missense mutations that have the G to A transition or nonsense mutations that cause a premature stop codon. And a company, ProQR, has stated that they plan to be in clinical trials in 2027. So if all goes well, they plan to be testing their therapeutic next year. So the ProQR does not plan to use a viral delivery. So again, as I said before, in theory, it's something that could be stacked with another genetic medicine that does use a viral delivery at some point down the road. So ProQR is first developing an RNA editing program for the R270X mutation, but they are also working on developing R168X and R225X. One advantage to RNA editing with no viral delivery is that it's not permanent, which means the side effects are also not permanent, but it would require redosing. So as I mentioned, no RNA editing program for Rett has advanced to clinical trials, so we don't have any efficacy data to talk about in Rett. I also want to mention there are other RNA editing approaches that are being developed. Some do use that AAV vector, so wouldn't be able to get it if you had received either Taysha or Neurogene AAV delivery. But those are not yet ready for clinical trials, so they're not as far as advanced. So the remaining approaches are a little bit further from clinic than the ProQR program, but I'm going to touch on them briefly. So next is MECP2 reactivation. It's important to realize this is for females only. So females have 2 X chromosomes and males only have 1 X chromosome. In a female, you can only have 1 active X chromosome in any given cell. So your body naturally silences one of your X chromosomes, and it's random which one it silences, either the one inherited from your mom or the one inherited from your dad, which means in theory, 50% of your normal functioning MECP2 is active, and 50% of the mutated MECP2 is active across your body. So the idea of MECP2 reactivation is, can you turn on either just the MECP2 on that silenced X, or can you turn on that entire silenced X chromosome so that you then have more MECP2? So there are different approaches that are being studied for how you could do this, and there's going to be different risks associated with. And I think as we see if any of those develop closer to clinic, then it would be really important to kind of understand what the differences are and how, what the risks are associated with it. Next, we'll touch on RNA transplicing. So this is an approach where a portion of the mRNA is swapped out so that you then have a normal functioning mRNA that then gets transcribed into a normal functioning protein. So this, again, the delivery of it depends on the program that's developing it. It could be AAV for the delivery. And then we'll talk about the next column, which is premature termination codon read through. So I mentioned earlier the mutations that have this premature termination codon, which means the building block to make your protein. So you're going along, you're reading your instructions to make your protein, and all of a sudden there's a stop sign, and it's too early. You're supposed to still be making protein, but it stops you from making the protein early. That's a premature termination codon. So it's giving a stop instruction. So then the rest of the protein doesn't actually get made, which impacts the function of the protein. And it depends on where in the gene that stop codon lives. Well, there's been research for really decades on, can you actually correct that to read through it so that you actually get past that error and keep making the protein. And the first drug that was made is really quite toxic to humans, so you can't actually give it in the doses needed. But more recently, there's been research that's been advanced in other diseases that uses a type of RNA called tRNA to kind of read through that error and keep going. So this would be relevant not for all mutations, but for those that have that premature termination codon or nonsense mutations. The next 2 columns, base editing and prime editing, these are editing of your DNA. So, we've been talking about RNA editing, but these are base editing, prime editing, or DNA. These are not quite as developed. So again, I think there's more time to see kind of how exactly these do get developed. If they're going to use AAV, if there's another delivery mechanism that is viable for these approaches. But base editing allows editing of point mutations. And prime editing is not only the point mutations, but also if you have an insertion or a deletion. So the prime editing is a little bit more comprehensive in what it can modify. And the final column here is the newest approach, which is a splice switching antisense oligonucleotide. And this actually was just a recent publication that came out of Dr. Huda Zogby's lab, where, again, looking at kind of the RNA, you can actually change how the RNA, there's a couple different isoforms. And if you increase one of those two isoforms, then it actually makes more protein. So you don't have to, you're actually increasing the abundance of the MECP2 protein, which is what we want, by instructing the mRNA to make more of one type than the other type. So this would be kind of an elegant solution that would be injected as an antisense oligonucleotide, meaning not viral. And so again, could be stacked with other genetic treatments that do use a viral vector, but that's very early in its development. So briefly, I know we're running out of time, but I want to show you a slide that gives you an overview of non-genetic approaches that are being developed. So these are drugs, or referred to as small molecules. And as we've talked about earlier, there's ongoing and upcoming clinical trials with multiple different drugs. And then there's several drugs that are earlier in their development. And this is the pipeline that we need to keep building because it's going to take multiple therapeutics for us to get to a place where we're really, treating Rett syndrome in a more holistic way. Is if we can attack Rett syndrome in multiple ways, give some genetic medicine, but also increase the pathways that are affected by this loss of MECP2. And those will hopefully work synergistically to get us further along than if we only used one type of medication. And before I close out to move to Q&A, I just want to talk about what you can do to help move the needle for us. And there's so many ways to be part of the solution. And the first I want to mention is to be a part of the IRSF Rett syndrome registry. This is so vital to the success of future clinical development programs that are coming down the pike. And adding your data ensures that we have a rich data set that really encompasses the full spectrum of Rett syndrome. Mild to severe, males, females, young, old, all of it is really important and really vital. But you do need to be at a COE to enroll, because I mentioned earlier that clinical data is an important part of the data set. Another way to be part of the solution is to fundraise for IRSF, allowing us to continue to advance the care and cure mission to help your loved one, both short-term and long-term. I know this has been a whirlwind over the last hour or so, and I want to circle back to what I said about IRSF's dual-pronged mission. We've been focused on our cure and care science arm, but what stands at the center of everything we do is community. And I came across this quote from a fellow rare disease mom, Effie Parks. She recently was commenting about the rare disease community on Rare Disease Day, which was on February 28th. And she said, "We celebrated the real treatment we can all access now, community. Community is indeed medicine. Whether it gives you relief to keep walking or it ignites you to take action, please find it. We're all around, and you are not alone." And community is so important. And I hope you join the Rett community at our Ascend National Summit. It's an in-person meeting for parents and caregivers of individuals with Rett and their extended family to connect with each other, learn from each other, learn from the experts, and to build and strengthen your community. There's nothing like being in a room full of people who just get it. And I want you all to remember, you are not alone, and IRSF is here with you all along the way. So with that, I know that we are at time, and I know that there were numerous questions that came in that I wasn't able to answer. So I want to commit that we will review the questions offline and answer them as we can, and share that material. So to everyone that joined today, thank you. To everyone that is walking this journey with us, thank you for walking with us. Thank you for contributing in whatever way makes sense for you and your family. We are grateful to you, and we're grateful to be able to serve you. Thank you very much.